Thank you all so much for joining us today for this presentation. A couple of just housekeeping things before we get started in the actual content of the presentation. As we are going along today, please, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. Those will come directly to me. I will try to answer them as I see them if possible, but there will definitely be plenty of time to answer any additional questions at the end, any that I've missed. There also is the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen that you can access and use as well. So chat or the Q&A, both are perfectly acceptable. This session is being recorded, so afterwards you will have a copy of this to go back and view again as you like, and also for those who registered for the on-demand session of this. I will be sending out that link later today. You can also access all of our on-demand video webinar content on our website. So if there are additional topics that we've covered that you want to see, or if you want to go back and view this again in the future, that is available to you as well. We're going to go ahead and get started. So today we are talking about building better website menus. And I have to admit that when we first came up with this topic, I very much wanted to call it something else. I wanted to call this the menu, not a horror story, which amused me, but maybe is a little bit niche if you aren't familiar with this movie. But a lot of times libraries website navigation, it feels overwhelming, it feels scary, and we want to make it so it's not scary for you or for your patrons who are using your site. So why are we presenting this? First of all, who are we? Who am I? A little bit of a late introduction, but I am Bethany Morse. I'm the business development manager for MugaWeb. MugaWeb is a web development company based in Vancouver, but we have clients all over Canada and the US across many different industries, including book publishers, magazine publishers, news content sites, museums, and public libraries. We have a special interest in public libraries and have developed a platform called Mugo Library that provides all-in-one website services. I myself was a public librarian in Kentucky for 16 years. So this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, is making the internet and web presences of public libraries more accessible and welcoming to their communities. Why are we presenting on this specific topic? We've covered a lot of different things in our webinar series, and this is something that has come up as a question several times. So we wanted to make sure we're providing a little bit more detail about menus in particular and website navigation. By the end of this session, we want you to understand a bit more of the technical aspects of navigation and accessibility, and some of the concepts and different types of menus that are optionally open for you. We want to give you tools that will help you manage your website, your menu, and plan out what should be on that a little bit easier. And then all of this is to help you better serve your community. So to kind of start us out, we are going to talk about what are the different types of website menus that are out there. Now, this is not a comprehensive list at all, but these are going to be some of the more common ones that you will see. And I'm sure all of you have probably encountered these before. So these should be pretty familiar. Before we get into the specific types, though, just making sure that we are all aware of the different kind of elements we're talking about. So we're going to be really focusing today on the primary menu area. So that is going to be your main menu or your navigation bar that's at the top of your page. This is what everyone is most familiar with. If you have sub-menus, drop-downs that show more links or details within a category of your menu, you're going to see those usually displayed by a little arrow to show that the option to drop down is there, or some kind of iconography to make sure people know that, hey, there's a submenu here. We're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the footer menu, which is something that a lot of people might overlook, but it's a very useful tool in navigation, especially if you have longer content, because by the time people have scrolled all the way to the bottom of your website, you want them to easily have a navigation aid to get where they need to go as well. There are other navigational tools that are going to be seen throughout different websites that we recommend using, but we may or may not be covering those today. So one of those would be breadcrumbs. So as you're navigating through a website, breadcrumbs are what will appear at the top. These are often links as well that allow you to see how you have navigated to this page, where you've been, and allow you to easily jump back to different segments. Sidebars are also navigational tools. These are a little bit different than side menus, which we'll be talking about, because these might be actually submenus. They only appear on some pages and some categories, but allow you another tier of navigation based on the category or the type of page you are looking at. And then finally, CTAs. And this one is a sample of an upcoming site we're doing, the picture here, but CTAs, or calls to actions, are great ways to highlight content on your site that you probably have links to elsewhere, different navigational aids, but CTAs draw attention to them. They're styled in a little bit differently just to call that extra information there, get people's attention to it, and provide a direct action that people can take. So those are also very, very useful things that help with the navigation of your site, but we're going to be focusing on the menus. So different types of menus. First of all, the drop-down menu. Everyone has experienced this in some way or another. And as I said, you're always going to want some kind of iconography or something on there to designate that this is a drop-down. There are options here below the main menu category. So this one over here doesn't have an arrow, so nothing else is going to be there. That's going to be a direct link. But these each are broken up into different categories. So the drop-down menu, it's expandable. It may or may not fill the full page like this one does here. This one's a little bit of a cheat here. This is almost a mega menu, but so you can see drop-downs that would be just one section, but it's an expandable menu with more options and links based on the categories. It can open on hover or on click. Now, benefits of this is it's a great way to show a variety of information, especially if you have lots and lots of links and content that you need to display in your menu. This is a good way to do that efficiently. It doesn't take up a ton of space on the page itself. Where there are some drawbacks to this is there are some kind of key accessibility issues around this type of menu that you want to make sure you have accounted for and that you have mitigations for. We're going to be talking about accessibility later on, but for instance, here you want to make sure that it's easy to navigate this without a mouse. You want to make sure that all of these things are clearly identifiable. The mega menu already alluded to this a little bit. It is a large full width drop down menu, conveys a lot of different information, will have subcategories within it, and might also have additional types of media included in the menu itself. So in this example here, you can see that it's got some pictures there to draw interest. Sometimes you will see video in mega menus. You'll see different kind of interactive elements in there. And typically a mega menu is organized in columns. So even though you have your primary category in the main menu, you will have subcategories and columns in the mega menu as well. This is another one that makes it very easy to convey a whole lot of information, a lot of links, a lot of very detailed things all at once. Doesn't take up a ton of space because, again, this is going to be a drop down type of menu. So it is only accessible when it is activated by your keyboard or your mouse. Drawbacks of these: sometimes they can have too much information on them. This can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if it's not really well organized. It can also be a little bit harder to navigate if you're a person with a disability. So again, you've got accessibility issues that you want to be mindful of if you're using a mega menu in particular. These, though, mega menus may be one of the most popular ones out there and are, again, very effective in that there's lots of information there and it will draw people's attention more than just a single drop down menu. The hamburger menu. So here we're going to talk about our food-based menus. I will admit that despite having worked on library websites for years and years, even mobile websites, I didn't know that this was called the hamburger menu for years because my background wasn't necessarily in web development, even though I was doing that. And also to me, it looks more like a stack of pancakes. But this is called the hamburger menu because you got your bun, you got your patty, you got your other bun. It looks like a hamburger, maybe. This is an icon that represents a collapsible menu. Uh, this also is something that should only be used in responsive menus. You don't really want to have a hamburger menu on your full screen site, at least not taking the place of your regular menu, because while we all know that that's a menu now, that's something that collectively we've learned, we know if we tap that, it's going to bring up more options. It may not be accessible to everyone, and it's not going to be the clearest user experience on a full-bodied website. But it's great for mobile sites because you have got limited space you're dealing with, and people do recognize on mobile that that's going to be how they access the menu. If you don't have a mobile responsive menu or site, that is something you really need to have, especially today, especially as a public library. If your site is not responsive, then you're missing out on a huge segment of your patrons and your population being able to easily access your site. There are a couple of different types of these collapsible iconography. So down here below, we have an example. So we've got the classic hamburger. You have the donor menu there. This is typically an icon used to show that there are filtering options available within a menu. So that can be helpful, and you may see it as an alternative to a hamburger menu occasionally. The bento menu is something I see more and more, and those again are just those little square boxes. It just indicates that there's more options. The kebab and meatballs, I actually don't hear them referred to this as that very often, but I enjoy that we have a whole line of food-based menus here. But these three dots don't typically represent your main menu. They would represent additional options or customizable choices within a menu set. But they're things you might come across, so we wanted to cover those. The sidebar menu, this is one I don't see used as often, but it's the same concept as your horizontal navigation bar, but the difference is it's on the side of the page, usually on the left-hand side, and it can be collapsible or it can be static. It is useful if you have a lot of vertical content on your page already, so really long articles, because it allows you to have all of that space and scroll down and not be cutting anything off in the top or bottom there. Some drawbacks to it, though, is it can be harder to see and harder to access, especially in smaller resolutions, and also it may not, people are not as familiar with it. Like, we're kind of trained to go to the top of the page to look for menus. So it may not be as noticeable on the side. Now, this particular one I'm showing is a little bit different. This is for one of our regional library clients. They have, you can kind of see it in the background here, they have a main horizontal menu. This was actually a small little sticky call out. We'll talk about sticky menus in a moment, but it just had their most requested information. So this will follow you down the page and you can click. This is obviously open. When it is collapsed, it is visible but doesn't take up a lot of space, but people can easily get menu hours, the location with a little map, and the most recent news article. So this is a good way of kind of incorporating both of those into one instead of just having a sidebar menu or just having a horizontal menu. Sticky menus. Now, sticky menus, again, same as the horizontal, but the difference here is that no matter how far you scroll down the page, these are going to stay at the top, as you can see in the video that's playing here. This is great, again, if you have a lot of vertical content, news articles on your site, and you still want to provide easy navigation without people having to move up and down the page a lot to find it. The drawbacks is it can take up a lot of space. It could be a little bit distracting. This one I think is a really great example of a sticky menu because you can see how low profile it is. It's still visible, you know exactly what it is, but it's not covering up other parts of the stage that people want to see and would have to scroll to view otherwise. And even with the banner up at the top, that disappears as you scroll down. So I think that's a great example of a sticky menu there. Okay, next we have interactive menus. And here I will say that so far, all of the other screenshots I've been using are our clients. This one is not because we obviously do not run the Amazon website. We are AWS partners, but this isn't our website. I included it though because it's probably the most recognizable example of this, of an interactive menu, which is a menu that can be customized based on the person using it. Now, that's either done through single sign-on, where they log on and it has their personal information in the menu itself. Streaming music services also would have that a lot of times because you want to be able to customize your navigation experience for that. You want to be able to say, here are my favorite artists. In the Amazon one here, like I didn't even know I was logged in, but some of the things it's customizing are based on your previous interactions. So what are the benefits of this? It can highly increase engagement. It's great for selling stuff, but the drawbacks to it are privacy concerns, of course. Also much, much harder to implement and much more expensive to do so. And it could be confusing for some users as well if they're relying on a specific memory path to get to a certain service or feature of your site, and that changes periodically. That could be a drawback. Now, that said, I don't know that libraries necessarily need a lot of interactive menus, but it's an option. It's out there. It's something to consider as well. All right, so now that we know the general types of menus that are out there, we're going to talk about what are the actual recommended practices as you start considering and laying out your menu. What can you do to make your menu better? A lot of noises in the background, we'll let pass there. Okay, first of all, when it comes to libraries, you have very different considerations than a typical commercial site or a business website. You all are not necessarily trying to sell anything. Like, you do have a branded presence. You do want to market what you are offering your community, but you don't have the same considerations as conversions and making sure, you know, people finish a transaction or things like that. You also have a whole lot of content, often a very wide range of content and materials that you've got to figure out how to categorize and organize in a way that makes sense. So libraries do a lot. You've got books, of course, but you're also doing programming. You're also providing community resources and services. And as you are doing all of this, you have a very wide range group of people who are using it, who come from different backgrounds, different educational levels, different skill levels, different needs. So it is kind of essential that you make this as streamlined and as easy to follow as possible to make sure that you're actually serving all of these individuals. You also may have considerations of things that you have to include in your menu that do or do not have anything to do with the library. So, like if you're a city organization or a county organization that you have regulations and your fiscal body or the city needs you to also include a link to their site and make it in your menu, or include certain iconography or logos or things. Sometimes you don't have full control over what you actually have in there. So how do you incorporate that in and make the best of that situation? The other place libraries kind of differ is usually in a menu of a site is going to only include internal links, things that have to do with their site specifically. Libraries promote a lot of different services and community resources. So there may be points where you have items in your menu that will actually send someone away from your website. And while that wouldn't be considered best practice for other websites, it is sometimes essential for libraries. So you've got to keep all of those things in mind when you're trying to decide what you actually want to include in your menu. So the first thing I'm going to say as you were thinking about that is analytics are your friends. If you do not have some form of analytics set up in your website, you should. Google Analytics is free. GA4 has so many things you can customize in it to get some really valuable information about the places on your website that people are already visiting. There are other services out there, some of them free, some of them paid, but you want to make sure that you're kind of looking in those as you're considering these things. Speaking of GA4 in particular, there is a pre-made report that you can go into that shows you your pages and screens. You can set it for a time period, whatever you need it to be, and then look at what are the things that people are viewing most. The things people are accessing most may be things you already have in your menu, they may not be. So if there's something on there that you're like, oh, this is a service that we have kind of buried 3 links down, but this is getting more hits than some of our main landing pages, maybe we need to put this up in the menu ranking. Or if it's not something that you're like, well, we need to put that in our menu, look at that page. What is it about the content on that page that is getting people to read it, that is getting people to stay on that page? What lessons can you learn from that page to incorporate into things that you do want people going to? It kind of works both ways with that. The other thing you want to consider as you are thinking about what do we put on our menu, I like thinking about your website as another branch of your library. So you have your physical location, you have your digital location as well. And I think sometimes we're better at identifying and navigating those physical locations for a lot of different reasons, but kind of think about it in the same way. When someone walks into your physical building and says, all right, where's the children's section? Where's your fiction section? Where's your computer lab? You probably have signs up to direct people to those areas. So think of your menu as your signpost to direct people to the places that they are most frequently going to want to go. And that could be really fun things like your computer lab. It could be things like the bathroom. You need signage for that so people know how to get it, so even the things that's like, okay, board minutes, here they are, not as fun, but also essential to get people to. Think of them also in terms of the people working within your library. If you have a staff person who is dedicated to a specific service, you want to represent that service on your website in some way. And often you're going to put it as someplace in your menu. So for instance, if you have someone in your library that is your liaison for homeschool students, you want a section that's easy when people visit your website, they can see that is a service. You are in many ways replicating what you do in the physical location digitally and making it easy for people who don't come into your library to see. Um, And then, of course, there's the general things that you want to include, like contact information. And when I say that, I'm not saying, put your phone number in your menu specifically. Maybe you would if you have a mega menu. Highly likely you're going to put that in your footer menu. But the basic information people need to know on how to find you want to make sure that's clear as a link that they can get to and get all of that information that they need. Last thing I will say about this, since we've kind of touched on these analytics, if you are looking for more information about how to use those services, GA4 in particular, you can set up custom events. So you can either then create custom tags and events and attach them to your current menu and see exactly how many times people are clicking that link in your menu to test it out. It's incredibly useful. We have some articles on our site that show you how to set up custom events. We also have another recorded webinar on how to audit your web page that includes some of that information. So if you're interested in that, check out one of those other resources to get a little bit more details about that. So once you've decided, like, okay, what all do we need to include in this, it becomes kind of a stylistic choice, design wise. Are you a maximalist or a minimalist? Some of this content here actually comes from questions people submitted ahead of time, which is like, how many items should you include in a menu? There's a couple of different guidelines that you can go by here. So the first thing I would say is your main bar menu here across the top, you only ever want that to be one line. So here there's plenty of room. If they needed to add another category here across the top, they absolutely could. If you have so many categories here across the top that it's bumping that down into 2 lines outside of that drop down menu, that is too much. You need to look at consolidating some of those, making some of those landing pages. It's not going to be a good experience if people are kind of having to break that up. As far as your categories inside your subcategories, general recommendations are you never want more than 7 items in a list here. Now, there may be some cases where you do have more than that, but here's why you want to keep that at a little bit lower level. It has everything to do with how people scan a site when they're reading it. So when people are looking at menus or lists in general, what they are noticing when they go to it is they're always going to see that first one. So you want to make that one a high priority for you. And then they will oftentimes see the last one, and then they will skip over everything else in between there. So you kind of have to consider that the more things you have in the middle, the more they're going to be overlooked. So you can get away with that by having kind of subcategories like we saw in one of the mega menu examples there to kind of break up those lists a little bit. There's then also the question about how do you organize these links here? These are alphabetical, which makes sense, right? We kind of like alphabetizing things as librarians. That might not always be what makes sense for you. You might have them listed according to priority or usage or age groups. There's many different ways you can look at this. It really comes down to what does your community respond to better and what is easier for your staff to find and use as well. It's important to also consider, like, as we're talking about things, interactive menus, images in your menu, those types of things. I am always going to err on the side of functional versus flashy, especially when it comes to public library websites and menus. For all those reasons we talked about before, you have such a wide range of people who are using this. You have limited resources, you have limited budgets, you have limited staff time to actually organize this and keep it up and running. You don't know what type of devices people are accessing on. You want to keep this as simple as possible. It can still look really, really good as a simple menu, but you don't want to add too many bells and whistles because that's just going to detract from what you are trying to get across. One of the other questions we had that I'm going to kind of address here, this was submitted ahead of time, was referring to, like, how to deal with high-level navigation only pages. So for instance, if you have a community links page, in those cases, I would have that as a landing page. I would set that up as a category within a submenu, or one of here that, not the drop down, just community resources. They can click once, they can go to that landing page. But what I would recommend against is just having a list of links on that page. If you are linking out to these other services, it's worth taking the time to set up a filterable list to make those easier to find based on the category. It's also worthwhile setting up the time to make sure that those are displayed in perhaps cards, or not necessarily a CTA, but something to kind of call out that information. You may have one or two third-party links here in your menu, but if you have more than two or three, make that a landing page, just because it's all together. It's going to be easier to find, especially if it has that filter list. It's going to be a much better user experience for your patrons. All right, naming conventions. I go back and forth on this one a lot for a couple of different reasons. We tend to get caught up in certain library jargon and ways of referring to things that seem perfectly clear to all the other professionals that you talk to, but may not actually be clear to your patrons. It's important that when you are naming the categories of your menu, that you are being clear and using common language for these. Don't use the jargon, don't use acronyms, don't use any of that. Be very specific. This is also one of those areas where I'm going to say my advice to you is going to differ a little bit than what it would for a commercial site. So if you're searching online and looking for guidance on how to label your menus, you're going to get a lot of articles that talk about the best SEO, search engine optimization, is if you have really unique names for your menu items. And that's probably the case for those sites, but I don't know that it is as important for public libraries. Absolutely, your patrons and users are going to be using Google to look up your site, but it's not exactly the same way that search. They're not using the same features to find your site. So you don't need to have like this brand new custom name for your events. It's not going to help you out with SEO in that regard. And it's going to be a little bit unclear when your patron finally gets to your website. But you can have unique names if you have a consistent way of referring to things throughout your library system. So if you have a program that is highly branded and promoted, and everyone in your community knows that it's by this name, even if another library calls it something completely different, then by all means use that unique name. Make sure that across your institution, whether it's physical in-person people or on your website, you are calling things by the same name. That's going to make it easier for people to find them regardless of where they are. Be consistent about that as you go. But beyond that, I would say that it is useful to talk to other libraries and see how they're organizing things. Just keep in mind that your community may be a little bit different. One of the questions that had came in said, was asking about pages that contain multiple topics, or menu items categories that include multiple topics. If they are things that would naturally go together, it is perfectly okay to use both of those names in that menu category. So one of our libraries has like projects and events together, which I like. projects in that instance mean something very specific to that library and those users. So they just have it with the little ampersand and it's one, and people know that those are kind of categorized together. I think that's fine. But you do want to remember that, you don't want it so long that you're having text cut off or wrapping. So just use a little bit of kind of common sense there as you're building that. All right, accessibility. I've mentioned this several times. The things I'm kind of discussing here are based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which your library's website should be accessible, not just because there are regional regulations that require it. So Canada has some very specific accessibility laws, and so does the US with the ADA has a website portion of it that applies. This just means that you are making sure that anyone can access your website regardless of disability, and that they are having a similar experience in doing so compared to people without disabilities. So what are ways that you can make sure that your menu in particular meets those accessibility guidelines? One of the first ones is a skip link. Now, this is something that only appears when you are navigating with your keyboard instead of a mouse or a touchpad or other traditional ways of navigating that. And it's just a little pop-up that allows people to skip to navigation, to skip to content, to skip to the footer, to move down to different pages or areas of the page. This is important because if you are using a keyboard or a screen reader and you're tabbing through here, every time you go to a new page on your site, if you don't have a skip link, they have to move through each and every one of your elements of your menu before getting to the main body of it, which can be incredibly frustrating and isn't how we use websites at all. We're only accessing the menu if we need it. Otherwise, when you go, you're going immediately down to the part that is actually of interest to you. If you are looking for guidance on how to include skip links in your site code-wise, it's a pretty simple process. We have a whole ebook that we published on accessibility that's available on our website that has the actual code and how to go about doing this. So again, check out that resource if you are interested. Other parts that are very important when it comes to accessibility in your menu is you need to make sure that the links are recognizable and you have the same style applied throughout the entire site. If for somehow you have a page on your website that has a different menu or a different look to the menu than you do on your homepage per se, you need to make sure that the links still look like the links over there. It makes it clear, makes people understand that something is going to happen when they click this. It's going to make it easier to understand for a screen reader or different type of mobility issues, navigation, what that is exactly doing. This also includes having outlines or something that when it is your cursor's moving over it to show up that this is a link. So there are different ways of doing it. You can keep it branded, you can keep it stylized to your specific library, but you should include that element in some way. And then cognitive design, we're going to talk about in a moment as well. It just means you want it clear with as few steps as possible to get to the most of your resources. Anytime we're talking about accessibility, I highly recommend test it out yourself. So use your keyboard just to access your menu. You're going to very quickly identify what some of the problems are. Use a screen reader, see out what it's reading as. So in this case, it's helpful. There are certain guidelines for how you should identify links for a screen reader. So when it gets there, is it reading out the context of what this link is supposed to do? Is it reading out that whole web address, which you don't want to hear from a screen reader? Test it out, see what some of the issues are on your site. And then finally, also color. If you have a drop-down menu, if you've got that mega menu and it's got a background color, make sure that the contrast between that background color and the text itself is at a high enough ratio so that it is easily distinguishable. There are all kinds of free tools online that allow you to go put in different colors and kind of test that out. The guidelines I was talking about have specific ratios that you are supposed to meet for different sizes and styles of text. So this are all things you need to be aware of and plan into your menu as you're creating it. Cognitive design, as I said, is making sure that your navigation is not relying heavily on someone's memory. So they don't have to go to a site and go, all right, here I have to click here first, and then I have to go to the third thing down on this page and click that button, and then I've got to go over here. You want to remove as many steps as possible. This is an accessibility issue. It's helpful for your seniors who are using your website. It's helpful for so many different things. This is another one that's great to kind of audit your site and test out. So as you're going through and exploring your website, either yourself or having someone else do it, like identify what your high level services are, your resources that you want people to see, and then count how many pages someone has to visit before they can actually access that. And if it's more than two, if it's more than three, then you really want to see what you can do to streamline that. This came from a question that was submitted as well. What about using icons on your site in your menu? This is going to end up being mostly a personal preference thing when you're looking at the design of your site. There's a lot of benefits to using icons in that they can help people identify things. As you're using them, the more you're using them, you're kind of creating a digital lexicon for your website, that it's a shorthand. People see that, they know what it means, they can click on it and they can go to it. It also makes, when you are doing those responsive menus, much easier to kind of condense some of that information. Now, on a desktop menu, a full width menu, I would say you have your icon and still the text to identify it, to help people learn what that is. And then in the mobile version, when it collapses down, you can just have those icons, which when tapped, people know the type of things that brings up. You would still have text there, but it is easier to kind of condense that. Where you get into some potential issues here is this kind of vocabulary that you've built around these images, is it actually understandable? Is it clear? And if it isn't initially, is it something people can easily learn as they are using the site? And then probably one of the biggest design challenges is, how do you find enough icons to actually represent everything you need to that are recognizable? Like, we know what the home button is, we know what the save button is, even though nobody uses floppy disks anymore. There are some of these that are kind of built in that everyone's like, yes, immediately I know what that is. But then when you start talking about, programs, events, what do you use for that? And do you have enough that stylistically match across, that you can incorporate across your site? So they can be useful. There's some evidence to show that it does kind of drive interaction and draw attention to something, but it can be a little bit challenging as well. Another question that came in ahead of time, thank you for those, is can you repeat things in your menu? So can you have links to the same service in multiple places on your menu? I would avoid doing that, at least in the main menu itself. So you want the menu to be clearly categorized, and it may be that, you're like, this really fits in both categories, but making a determination and kind of putting that together is important. Otherwise, it could be confusing, especially if something changes later on. That said, absolutely you should have links to things in multiple places. So if you have something that is linked in your menu, maybe you also have a featured card of it on another page. Maybe you have a CTA that focuses on it. Maybe you make a button at some point that people can click that take them to that. Like, people do access things in different ways, and you want to make sure you're covering the breadth of those experiences. I will say also that in your footer is a perfect place to repeat things that are already up in your main menu, especially those high value ones, the things that you think people are most going to be looking for. If they've gotten already to the bottom of your content, they can easily navigate to and from there. All right, your menu specifically, how do you actually plan out your menu layout? I highly recommend doing this in an analog fashion first, which maybe sounds counterintuitive, but it's a great experience doing this, and can make it much, much easier to conceptualize for you and your team. So this is actually using an example from one of our clients, that when they were developing their site, they took a day and everybody sat down in a room and got a blank wall and a whole bunch of post-it notes and started writing out each of the pages that they wanted on its own post-it note, and just started laying it out on that wall where they could talk about it and they could move it around. The moving it around is the key point of that, because you want to try out different things. You want to see how it looks. And then absolutely, once you've laid that out, try it out in a wireframe, try it out, have different staff members test it out. This again, analytics are our friends here. So if you have a list of things, you're like, I know that I want to include these in our menu, compare those against your analytics, see what you've missed, what should go in there. And then also, don't do this in a couple hours, you're done. Leave that wall up for a week. Leave it up, come back to it, see if it still makes sense at different times. Bring in other staff members, bring in patrons to look at it and ask, does this layout make sense to you? There are a lot of different ways that you can do user studies and testing ahead of time. So this is the incredibly low budget way to do it, but it is still very effective. And like I said, sometimes nothing beats just being able to look at it all spread out and move it around and have a physical representation of that before you digitalize it. And then finally, you want to make sure after you have put your menu together, it may not be done yet. Test it out. Keep watching those analytics, compare them back and forth, see what you've improved. Make sure you were recording this somewhere, because just numbers and data that's not recorded just become anecdotes. You want to actually be able to show what you have made progress in. Heat maps are great for gauging effectiveness as well, before or after this type of project. There are free services like Microsoft Clarity that use heat maps. So what that is that's going to show you a picture of your page, whichever page you're looking at, and it's going to have color representations of how many times people clicked in different areas. So you would get a bright red spot up in your menu, hopefully, or you might get a spot down here that people are going to first. It really shows you how people are actually using your site. Now, if you are using those, again, like Microsoft Clarity, it does use screen recording to do that. So make sure you've built that into your privacy policy. It doesn't record any personal data, but you just want to consider that, you know, this is a third-party service that you're giving certain access to your site to. Survey your users, survey your staff. Do a yearly or biannually website survey. Ask people, what are you using? What is difficult to access on our website? What do you wish you could find easier? Those types of things. And then your staff, your desk staff, are the people who probably are on the front lines here getting the most questions about your website from the people who come in and use your physical building. Have a way to record what they are observing. So your stats list that you keep there at your circulation desk, have a place on it for people to mark down, your staff to mark down how many questions they're getting about the website, what specific services, because again, you need to record that. You need to do that in an easy way that you can go back and look. It's going to be simple for your staff. It's going to be easy for you and provide a lot of information about the things that are working well for you and the things that maybe need a bit more work as well. All right, questions. And I see I have at least one here that's popped up in Q&A. So I'm going to answer that first. Please, if you have any other questions, put them in the chat, put them in Q&A. So this question is, if we have short pages, less than 2 mouse scrolls, will a footer menu still be beneficial? I would say yes. Now, a footer menu, maybe you don't have a lot of items in your footer menu, but a footer is part of your page structure of your website, and you're going to have other things there anyway. You're going to have your policy notices, you're going to have contact information. And even if it's like less than 2 scrolls, it could be worthwhile, putting, link to your account, link to the catalog there. Anything you're doing to save your users time and increase their experience, is making that better for them, is worthwhile. Another feature of Google Analytics right now in GA4 is if you have enhanced analytics set up, which is something you can set up in the admin panel, you can actually see exactly how many people are scrolling all the way down to your footer. So it shows you percent of page scrolled and kind of shows that across all your pages, and you can look and see, do people even reach that on our pages? Worthwhile seeing. But I do think that the footer menu is a very helpful navigation tool as well. All right. I haven't seen any other questions come in, but if you have additional questions later on, please feel free to contact us. We will be sending out this video for you to review again, and you can always shoot me an email, and we're happy to help and provide more details. Please also check out our other webinars that cover some of the things we've talked about in here if you want more information on that.